Hey, we ran out of questions this week, and none came in, so maybe this will just be a short video. But I put out an emergency. Get out of here! Disgusting. You unironically named yourself Fenrir. Let me guess, you're playing as a Worgen. Interrupting my intro that you don't know exists. How dare you? I need to bait dinosaurs? What the hell? Alright. Cool. So I put out a little emergency Q&A thing in the Discord server, that the Patreon sub-channel of the Discord server. And I got a couple, I guess. So first up, Calliope Rannis asks, what do you prefer, Apex or Overwatch? And I kind of... I think I immediately would answer Overwatch at the moment. It's not entirely fair in some ways. One is that I'm just way better at Overwatch than I am at Apex so far, and part of that might be the fact that it's just easier to be better at Overwatch than Apex, but also I've put in significantly more time, and I generally get to play it with a larger group of my friends. So like a whole bunch of us can all get together and we can hang out, and we get to talk about other things and have some fun with it and so on. And it's largely kind of a different thing that leads to me enjoying myself more, which in a way leads to liking the game more. And I question this thought process sometimes, in particular because I'm also playing Rethink Evolved right now, and I got like probably 2/3 of the way through the game in my first session, I think. And what stood out to me immediately was how I seem to be enjoying the game more, but it's also significantly easier than either of the other Rethink games, Rethink 1 and 2, which are technically the first and fourth games in the series, because that series has a weird naming scheme. And there's a question sometimes of whether or not something is more fun because it's easier, or more fun because it actually has something else going on mechanically that you find engaging. Like on some level, I do find Rethink Evolved to be more enjoyable than Rethink, in part because it's less like Archaea, whatever that game was called, Path of Light, versus it's less like that and more like Talos Principle. And that Talos Principle, even if it does have often finite solutions, there's more of a sandbox feel to how you interact with the puzzles themselves, whereas Archaea and Rethink 1 and 2 are games where you apply your puzzle pieces to a very rigid grid and really specific spots you're allowed to play in, and so it's all about like just staring at the thing in front of you and kind of running through the combinations in your head until you come across it. It's like the difference between a portal map that has like really sparse portal surfaces, where there's clearly a very specific intended what am I supposed to do with this? Oh, there we go. It's like this idea that you're supposed to look at this really specific series of variables and cross-compare them, and you kind of, it's like one is you look at these things, you cross-compare them, and you have to like run through the combinations, basically like a Rubik's Cube or a sliding tile puzzle or any kind of combinational thing, I guess, versus the more Talos Principle approach, having like or like a portal map that's covered in portal surfaces, like all the walls can put portals everywhere. Suddenly you're like, you have all this free reign to experiment and try out the thing. And in essence, technically, the more restrictive one might actually be making the puzzle easy for you in some ways, because it's making it so you can only put stuff in specific locations, so you only check them in certain ways. Although I guess that can go both ways. Like in portal maps, when they only let you portal specific, really specific places, I think that often serves the purpose of you, of like highlighting some of the more important locations so that you can sort of like laser focus your way through the mission a little faster, as opposed to flailing in a giant sandbox. Whereas in Archaea and Rethink 1 and 2, I think that the allowed surfaces often obfuscate what you're able to do, or intentionally make the puzzle harder, because the obvious places you would try to go are just places you're not allowed to do anything in, and so you have to do stuff arbitrarily in completely awkward places, making the puzzle way harder, perhaps. Blah, blah, blah. So sometimes these things make it more difficult. Sometimes they make them more interesting, and it's interesting trying to figure out which one is the most gooder game, or whatever, or like which experience do you appreciate the most and why is often a thing that you can try to unpack. In part because I find it curious, because me having the first reason that come to mind of why I like Overwatch being that, like, hey, we win approximately 50% of our games, and it's a fun thing, and I'm having a good old time, versus Apex, where I've won one game ever, but also statistically you're not going to win very often anyway, and Tetris, which I've never won, period, is that it brushes up alongside of another thing that we talk about, which is when I talk about, like, the more engaged I am, and the more challenged, not necessarily challenged for the sake of challenge, but just like the more directly engaged and the more that's expected of me at times is often when a game is better. The idea of, like, being a Diablo or Warframe fan versus being a Dark Souls fan and other similar titles, like, the gaps there. Like, do you want to play in your free time Diablo 3, or do you want to play Destiny? These are supposed to be similar examples. Or do you want to play Ninja Gaiden Sigma Black? Wait, those are two different titles. They're both the first Ninja Gaiden game, but one of them was Black and one of them was Sigma, and they didn't stack the titles. Or do you want to play Dark Souls 2 Scholar of the First Sin? Like, there's gaps there, and some people can enjoy both for a variety of reasons, and that's valid too. That's what I find myself thinking about when I question which one I like more. But Apex is super neat. They're both wins for me, and thankfully, I don't have to cross-compare them and choose a winner generally. And I think this is something that people get too hung up on sometimes in the games industry, is demanding a winner or having to, like, be of, like, a particular tribe. Like, this... Like, there's always these arguments of, like, this console is better than that console, and this matters to me for some reason, even though I don't have stake in either company. Which gets funnier when it becomes, like, completely free, downloadable, executable stores on the PC, where people have to do the same thing. They really, really heavily start to tribalize between different groups, and will have all these arguments about why this thing is bad or evil or has these other problems and the other ones are great or so on. Meanwhile, I just use whatever tool is available to me at the time to do whatever I need to do, basically. And some of them are kind of valid. Like, I've heard that there's been some questionable, controversial stuff behind the scenes, somewhat politically, with, like, the GOG people, but at the same time, GOG is, like, the one PC store where you get, I almost said royalty-free games, where you get DRM-free games, where you can just download the game and you can take it anywhere, you have the files, and you just share it everywhere, and like you just have that game to work with, and you don't have to have, like, an online subscription or an account name to allow you to access it in the future, unless you lose the files. You don't have to like sign in to verify that your current purchase is valid. Like, I've had the experience of, like, the shitty experience of when my copy of Dragon Age Origins became an online only game, which was shitty. I was playing it on the Xbox 360 and had already beaten the entire game in single player. I mean, in vanilla version, I mean to say. And then DLC came out for the game. And so, okay, cool, there's DLC now for Dragon Age Origins. Whatevs. So I checked out the DLC, and yeah, I eventually ended up playing Dragon Age Origins all the way through, like, probably 3 times. But when the DLC came out, suddenly you had to be online to verify you had a legitimate purchase of the DLC, which I'm like, how did it get on my Xbox 360 if I didn't purchase it legitimately? I feel like there's a lot of hoops to jump through to make this illegal. And if somebody can get that far, they can probably fool whatever verification system we're currently dealing with, but okay. My internet went down, and I just got kicked out of my session of Dragon Age Origins on my console. On a single-player game, which of course a lot of us had that experience too with Diablo 3, which I don't know if they ever changed that about Diablo 3, but at least when it launched, it was an online-only game, even if you were playing single-player characters, and if you didn't have a stable internet connection, you would just get kicked out of your game. And even if you weren't getting kicked out, if you were like me and you had a perfectly fine connection most of the time, just because the game was so popular and so the servers were so slammed, you would experience lag, like while you were playing, because every single game you played had to be connecting to a server. And so like your character, you did a thing where you'd run down a room and then you teleport back to the beginning of the room because it didn't take the thing you did. And like you'd experience all these forms of latency, or like all the enemies like stop moving for a while, and then suddenly 10 seconds later they're all in different locations and half your health is gone, or you died off camera basically during the lag spike. That stuff would happen during the actual gameplay of your single player game, and it was a nightmare. And that kind of stuff happened with Dragon Age, a single player game in like 2008. So I can see like. So like I can see why people would have arguments one way or another for like certain platforms, but at the same time I often can't shake the feeling that people don't necessarily create these back and forths because of those reasons as so much as they chose one to be loyal to, and they just have an inherent reflex against anything that's not the thing they're loyal to. Like, there's all these different arcade, like, multiplayer shooters or MOBAs. They're all competing with each other and the MMOs. And there's always the inherent thing of the moment you say you like one thing, half the people in the room are like, gross. And they have just the dickest reaction to the fact that you dared to like a thing. And it's like, instead of just extending an olive branch and being like, hey, yeah, let's talk about that thing. Haha, I played this similar thing and so on. It's always like this weird, like, be a dick thing. And sometimes it's playful and sometimes it's not, or even when it is playful, it's put in a way that maybe is off-putting in any way and is probably a bad practice. And I think a lot of us do it, and maybe we shouldn't. Just like across the board. I need to go to Marshall's stand. Oh yeah, back there. You alright? I have to slap him, he starts passing out. Oh man, Ringo, wake up. What is this quest? What is this quest? But the game I'm playing right now is actually a good example of that idea, because it's not enough just to be like, hey, we both play World of Warcraft. Like, there's the Alliance and Horde split, and people will react like weird douchebags if you're on the wrong side of that split, even though you just arbitrarily picked a character. I wonder if there's like analytics somewhere that show that like, hey, if you include tribalism competition into your games, it makes the games perform better. I'm just curious about that, because like the first thing that oh no, is he gonna pass out? God damn it, there was an enemy. Because the first thing that happened in Pokemon Go is that they introduced 3 factions to all compete with each other, and I just it felt like a weird inclusion. Like, I guess there is like a territory control mechanic in the game technically, but it was like day one, the moment you level up in that game, you have to pick a class from scratch. You have to pick a team with very little context, and then find out the hard way afterwards that maybe you picked the wrong team or whatever. And in my particular thing, I want to say that Marty and every single person in the entire friend group of his and so on were all in Valor, and I was Instinct, which I then would find out was like the one that everyone mocks or something. And so there's always this weird element to it. And I don't know, I don't have a lot of answers about that idea. I'm just thinking about it. Because there is like an interaction that's encouraged by these kinds of splits that I don't think is always helpful. But anyway, this is like wildly off topic, but that's fine because I'm finding my own things to talk about, because otherwise I have to go back to the anonymous questions, which I'm sure we'll get to anyway. But yeah, my first reaction is to say that I like Overwatch more than Apex. It does help that the characters play a bigger role. One thing that does bum me out about Apex is that it has all these different characters, and the parts that matter about them aren't what you expect to matter, and many of the things that seem like they're going to be cool and fun to use are never very satisfying. Like, two of the characters have like a mortar strike bombardment skill, which sounds like the coolest thing ever, and I've never felt satisfied when I've used it ever, and to the point where it's a thing where I don't even notice when my ult is up. Which is a weird thing in its own right, is that they went for the Overwatch style character structure of pick your character and they have like, here's their passive skill, here's their active skill, and here's their ult. But then those abilities don't have the impact. Some of them can be pretty neat. Everything's inherently situational, which is kind of interesting. Like none of these people have like the ability to attack by pressing the button or anything, which I think probably generally makes sense. I've got way too many outdated quests apparently in this inventory now. Whoops. Like way too many. I have been around apparently. I find it interesting that all their skills are situational instead of just being directly applicable to the fight. It leads to an effect where what matters more than anything is what weapon you get and stuff like that, and how good you are with that weapon. But part of me does prefer the hero shooter stuff from Overwatch, in part because of the fact that I am not a super practiced, super twitchy shooter guy, and the people who like that genre have been playing it obsessively forever in many cases, just for years and years and years and years and years. Some of them basically their whole lives, in the case of like the many teenagers and children and so on that in addition to having a reflex advantage just are conditioned to keep going with these certain genres. Whereas I fell off of shooters a long time ago, right after I fell onto them. I haven't really followed shooters or fighting games as a genre. I really did just play Halo 2 and Dead or Alive 4. And those were like the two games I competitively played basically ever, outside of maybe some Diablo 2 PvP and World of Warcraft like arenas and battlegrounds PvP, neither of which I liked very much. It was always just tons of Halo 2 and Dead or Alive 4. And so I never like, there was a time where I felt like I was capable enough at those things. In Dead or Alive 4's case, it had the effect where it actually kind of killed my interest in the game, because nobody would ever play the game with me, because I would completely crush absolutely everyone. And yet my experience of going online was just me getting crushed by everyone, because I wasn't good by internet terms, but I was too good to have the fun of playing with anybody anymore. And so I was the guy who was too good at Dead or Alive, but not good enough to actually pierce through. It's they're multiplayer games I played enough that I remember my stagnated score, because back then those games in particular, instead of having what is attacking me right now? Oh, there he is. Those games in particular, instead of having like a magic number that just goes up forever the more you grind, which is one of many Skinner boxes that have been added to games in order to prolong people playing. It used to just give you a skill ranking and that was it. Nowadays, in a post Call of Duty 4 world, every single online competitive game has to have some kind of progress meter that's always happening all the time, because Call of Duty 4 showed that putting a bunch of Skinner boxes in your game that's largely about the same thing happening over and over again makes people play longer. So that was the game where you could level up and level up and level up. Then you could prestige, so you could start the level up meter again, because hitting max rank is boring. You want the meter to keep going forever. I'm prestige 12 or whatever. I don't know how many times you could prestige. And that's why in Overwatch, instead of just giving you like a skill ranking, they also give you like, I'm level 427, because they want you to always feel like you're progressing in some way. But back then, in Dead or Alive 4, I was a B+, and in Halo 2, I was a 27. I think I was a 27. It's something around like 27, 28 or something. In those games, you just had a ranking. If you won a lot, it would go up, and if you lost a lot, it would go down. I think I have to specify that in Halo 2's case, I was a 27 or a 28 in Team Slayer, which is the most played thing, because you actually had a separate ranking in every single individual ranked mode, whereas Dead or Alive just had ranked and unranked matches, and that was it. I was thoroughly okay. I mained Christie and Kasumi and Hayabusa, and this means something to someone, I'm sure. I toy around with the idea of covering Dead or Alive 5 and 6 on the channel, because they both have story modes that actually have like a story to them, whereas Dead or Alive 2, 3, and 4, which I've also all played, I think you would just like launch, I think you would play a little rapid fire thing where you fought like 8 opponents and then a boss fight at the end, and they were largely context-free random fights, but then halfway through the campaign there'd be like a rival character with a cutscene dedicated to it, and then at the end when you beat the final boss, you got like an ending pre-rendered CG cutscene made just for that character, which is pretty standard for stuff like Tekken and many other fighting games back then. But specifically 5 was when they added a linear storyline where you over the course of it you played most of the cast, and a bunch of like an actual story was playing out over the course of it instead of like nothing basically. And then I think 6 has done the same thing again, but I've heard not amazing things about it, but it'd be kind of fun to go back, even though I probably have forgotten how to play completely. But yeah, we talk about this when we compare Overwatch and Apex with each other at times, like like Andrew brought this up too, is like the idea that Overwatch feels like it's designed in a lab to make you feel all right on a regular basis, and there's some parts of that design stuff that I like and some parts that I don't like, and it's mainly because some of them are more artificial than others. I don't really like that much in particular, it's really the loot boxes and experience meters that bother me the most. Always making some kind of progress, and then the progress leads to a loot box that is an item, a box of items that is conditioning you to want to gamble further, because that is their whether you fall for it or not, you can't deny the fact that it's clearly their point is to get you to buy more of them, and the fact that they keep putting it in all these games just shows that people do that, because that's the whole business model. If Blizzard's goal wasn't to make you buy more loot boxes, they wouldn't sell them. Woo! It's possible to have loot boxes just as a Skinner box mechanic, similar to Call of Duty 4's experience meters and everything, just as an incentive to keep playing, and not sell them. There are games that do that. I think Duck Game does that, if I remember correctly, but I could be wrong. There are games that have loot boxes just as a randomized Skinner box reward system, but they never sell them to you. So they're not trying to manipulate you to buying them. It's just a Skinner box thing of giving you randomized rewards constantly as an incentive to keep you playing and keep you engaged with the game, which has its own problems, but has fewer than the other one. It's better than selling them, and all that. But There's a few things that are interesting, which is that Overwatch gives you a bunch of information that's designed to make you feel better about any given round. So basically, Overwatch tries to make losing feel better all the time. And they do that in a few ways. One is just pure gameplay, which is the fact that the video game itself is designed to make you feel good in every match, at least at some points, even if you are losing. And part of that is built into the idea of the abilities, and especially the ults. On one level, like you can get a specialized thing. You can be a Widowmaker player, or a Lucio player, or a Reinhardt player, and have massively different gameplay experiences, and sort of find your own niche based on your skill set and what you want to practice at and stuff like that. But there's also the additional layer of the fact that how do I put this? There's the additional thing where there's the skills themselves that have their own cooldowns, which every time you use a skill, it's usually pretty satisfying, even if it's not pulled off amazingly. But then if you pull it off great, then that skill use usually feels fantastic. Like there's a real impact to a lot of that stuff. Meanwhile, the ults themselves are like, I am center stage for this moment in this game. That you have this sudden chance to be noticed by the entire battlefield, and also have a moment where you feel like you did a big thing, even if it was in your own small way. Like just having a moment where, hey, I gave my entire team shields, or I created a giant barrier over there that paused all shots being fired in that direction for X amount of time, or I just blew up this room or something. Those kind of fundamentally change how things interact. And it's in most... Oh, Jesus. I need to get rid of some of these. Go away. There's too many quests. There we go. Oh god, alright, I'm just gonna give an oath to this guy. This is easy. Yeah, sure. This is a smart thing to do. Nah, I'm a squire. That was probably funny dialogue, but I gotta get places. Oh god. I have to get rid of something else again. Oh yeah, this was a multi-person quest that I couldn't handle, so let's get rid of that. I'm probably not gonna go back. There we go. But I talked about this with Andrew, and I think he agreed with me, was the idea that like the ults themselves seem designed to make you feel like you had your moment each match. And that's something that I see in myself on a regular basis when I'm playing both Overwatch and Apex, actually, is you'll notice this about me, and sometimes I don't like this about myself, and sometimes I kind of revel in this part of the game and am happy that it exists and so on, even if it makes me look like a jackass, kind of, is that there's a lot of matches of Overwatch and Apex, both of them, where I finish the match and then I'm sitting there trying to like explain to my team the cool thing I did or whatever, like just like the neat thing that happened, and I think that's neat. Because it's the good feeling you have, like you get to cling on to the thing that happened, and you got to find victory somewhere in many of these cases. In part because, especially with Apex, you will not win matches, generally speaking. Not only are you statistically unlikely to win matches in a 60-player match where there's 20 teams, like if you're being hyper charitable, you have a 1 in 20 chance of winning, but another issue specifically with Apex and Tetris 99 is that a tiny subset of the player base is so comically talented at those games that actually your chance of winning is way worse than 1 in 20, because you will be obliterated by these people. If you watch certain people that stream Tetris 99, they get win streaks, which feels like it shouldn't be possible in a battle royale. Like, when you think about the concept of a battle royale, generally speaking, there's so much chaos to a lot of the genre that the idea of there just being straight up win streaks seems like it'd be like against the code. Like it's almost like it'd have to be like a fluke, or wow, that person sure had a lucky day. But there's people who regularly get win streaks on Tetris 99, and that's 99 other people that never stood a chance in many cases, or let's say 96 other people that never stood a chance. There's probably like 2 or 3 really good players in there that are just being surpassed. But that's a whole thing. And that was kind of to be expected, because Tetris has such a range of skill between players and such a high skill ceiling that there were going to be the nightmare people that can just do the impossible. When you see those people play and you're someone like me, you can't even tell what the fuck's happening on the screen. But that stuff does still apply to stuff like Apex, and I definitely had the feeling of that existing when I dipped my toe in with stuff like Realm Royale and other MOBAs that I played with friends. Was just, you would see what they were doing and be kind of concerned by how effective some of the other players seem to be at the game, which really dampens your spirits at your chances of winning. Something that specifically was appealing about PUBG, at least when I played it, and it's been so long that maybe this is all wrong now, is that it was a little janky, but also so large, and there's such a camouflage and stealth element to it, so you could hide in bushes and so on, and you died relatively quickly, that one of the upsides of this, despite the game not feeling good, was that you could get the drop on a pretty good player and kill them just through happenstance. And so one of the appeals of me covering PUBG for like 20 episodes like I did was the fact that there would be a different narrative to each episode. Every session that I did, every game, it just had a narrative to it, and that here's where we started, we went from there to there, this is the kind of stuff we got, here's the encounters we had, here's the moments where I heard something and wasn't able to identify what I heard, and like, what was that? Or I heard a car go driving by and I ducked in the bushes, too separated from the rest of my squad. Like, there's all these moments that you can have in a thrilling little stealth chase. And as I showed, despite not really even being good at shooting and so on, I did win a disproportionately large number of games for how little I actually played the game. I don't remember the exact number, but I want to say that I won like 4 or 5 matches, and that's a lot for only 20 episodes. And people will totally go after me for being like a camper, camper or hiding or coward or whatever approach and so on, but having tools in your arsenal to compensate for other people's twitch reflexes and so on is an interesting thing to have access to. And there's some of that. There's definitely some of that in Apex, in that like there's lots of matches where like the top player will be established in the first opening shot of the game, and then like a moment later they will be completely dead. Like, they'll be dead 5 minutes into the match, or they'll be dead 30 seconds into the match, and it shows like there is like a back and forth. Admittedly, there's the question of whether that person was trying to win, or if they just dumped themselves directly into the fray, and knowing that they'd probably die immediately despite the fact that the game put all the hype on them. But you know, but I basically, I've only won 1 match ever of Apex, and that felt like a fluke, where everyone was running from the barrier, and I don't know, and like, some of my friends that are better than me at the game have won multiple times, and I've still not won again since that first time, and I don't really have much hope for it. I can kind of cling to... I can kind of just... What I need to do when I play Apex oftentimes is just kind of cling to the feeling of like, well, I got X number of kills, and I still don't know if I'm breaking even yet on kills versus deaths, and I'm probably not. But basically, a good game is just one where I kill more times than I die, which that's just to say I get more than 1 kill, basically. Because breaking even is getting 1 kill, because you will die once, ultimately. But I guess you can be revived and all that. I wonder... The game probably doesn't take away your kills after the person you killed revives, huh? I guess it did more or less take, anyway. But yeah, you really have to try to find your joy and try to cling to things and like be like, oh yeah, look at that damage I did. Like, I really had that little moment where I used the triple take and shot across this distance and got X number of... I did like 800 damage, isn't that crazy? And like, it might even be somewhat obnoxious to be like shouting out those kinds of moments, but at the same time, if I don't milk those for enjoyment, then it's kind of hard to stick with the game at times. And even those moments where I feel like I did something, it probably didn't affect the ultimate outcome of the match, but you just try to find something. Whereas, yeah, Overwatch, you have your main ability, you have your ult that is a battle chain. It's oftentimes a battlefield changing button, which comes back based on how well you're doing too. You have the play of the game is the big thing, which can be disappointing because it's often just a person pressing Q. But then you have like what I appreciate even more than that is the end cards. There's those cards that pop up that try to like congratulate the various players for whatever particular thing they were doing right, and then there's the medals that try to rank how people are doing within the composition of the party and like who got the most healing or damage blocked, and just try to track these kinds of numbers. Its meaningfulness is variable. I think I liked it better when I thought that it was I think I liked it better when I thought that the medals were of the entire game, as opposed to being I don't know how to how do I save this damsel? Damsel? Damsel, are you alright? Are you okay? I think I'm supposed to have him following me right now and he disappeared. I think it broke. Oh well. What was I on? I think I liked it better when the two teams were being compared, like healing done. When it says gold, silver, bronze, I thought I was being compared against the enemy team and my team, whereas it's apparently just my team, which makes it feel a little cheap, because that means that gold, silver, bronze, half the team medals then, because it's a 6-person team, half the team's going to get a medal if that's how you broke it down, as being one gold, one silver, one bronze in a 6-person team. Like, that's why oftentimes somebody who doesn't even have a main heal, but just randomly popped a heal ever, or has a healing effect on their character somewhere, will get a medal because they don't have competition, basically. Meanwhile, other elements of the game that feel like they should have a medal don't, and maybe it's just because I've been maining Orisa lately and I feel underappreciated, but the the game doesn't give me credit. I block 15,000 damage in a match, and I feel like I'm doing hot shit, and then the game doesn't even acknowledge the fact that by the end that, hey, you did good work there. It's a tiny, like, sub card on the bottom of the screen under all the medals that doesn't medal. Which I'm curious about, because, like, they must think that there's enough people healing within the party to justify having an entire slot dedicated just to the concept of healing. But not enough people blocking damage, apparently, to dedicate medal to blocking damage, I guess. Uh-oh. This is not looking good. Can I make this work? Ooh, boy. It is not easy to fight one-on-one in those. I need to take a drink. I should probably cut this question off soon, because I've way overexpanded this and talked about every relevant thing. I didn't think I'd be talking about multiplayer so much. I actually didn't think I'd talk about this much in general, this question in particular, but who would have guessed that I'd be having so many sessions in general where I find myself talking about multiplayer video games. Boy, the times have changed, huh? Overwatch is very fun. And it's funny because I was partly afraid to try the game specifically because of how separate I've been from the competitive multiplayer anything field, and you just get stomped. Part of that fear is definitely founded in reality. Andrew and I, when the Master Chief Collection came out, and when I got my Xbox One, we streamed playthroughs of I think we did Halo 1, 2, and 3. We might have done ODST, I don't remember. We were trying to do all of them at some point, I think. I don't remember how far we got. our goal was to play all of the Halo games all the way through. Specifically, we would do it in a marathon stream. We would actually do the entire game in one sitting via live stream. Rather ambitious ideas for an era where ambitious is a strong way of putting it, but it's just funny to me thinking about these big streams happening specifically during the era when there wasn't really anyone watching. There was very little viewership for these streams back then. But after one of them, I think it might have been Halo 2, because I think that might be the shortest of the three. Right after we finished one, we still had some energy left, so we popped into the multiplayer of the Master Chief Collection, and we like weren't getting kills. And it's not like a battle royale where it's like, oh, it's a coin flip of like, will you get one kill or will you die before you get a kill? It was like, no, these are like 25 kill Slayer matches with 4 players, or 4 players per team. Like every single one of you should be getting minimum at least a few kills, because like winning is everybody in the party getting like 6 kills at the least. I had a lot of Slayer matches where I was getting 10, which when I think back, I'm like, that's like half the party's kills. What the hell? But that sounds like the right number. We were just getting, it was just like, this is impossible. What do we do? Like that, but it was the realization of like, that's what happens when you used to play a game in 2004, and here you are trying to play it again in 2014, and you left, but everyone else didn't. Or at the very least, these people have been playing the last few months at least, or years, or maybe the last decade, and it's like, you can't even play. Or it's like when you try to play Smash Brothers, and like my experience with Smash Brothers being like somebody that like played Melee with friends for fun, and then like would randomly find myself in a Smash 4 or Smash Brawl session for a moment, and not even able to like take part in the fight, basically, because everybody else has just been moving forward without you. So like, it might have been different if I had gotten swept into Overwatch when it first came out. Because when it first came out, when Overwatch first came out, there was that poll between Overwatch and this war of mine. And Overwatch almost won. I very nearly had a Patreon Overwatch series. It was a tie. And then I did a sudden death round where people had to pick one or the other, because up until then, oh, look at the tiny guy. Normally you can pick all the games you want, every game from the list you want to, check all that apply. But I did a when I do sudden death, I make you pick one or the other, specifically because of the fact that something has to fucking win. And it's meant to address the idea that maybe there's a decent chance that everybody voted for those two things equally in the check all that apply, but there's certain one they want more, and now they have to make that choice. Basically. But yeah, I did this war of mine, and then the guy who nominated this Overwatch just never nominated again. I didn't track that. I don't remember who it was, like if they were still a Patreon subscriber the next month or what. But Overwatch never got nominated again, which is surprisingly common. A game will come right down to the wire and then disappear. It happened with God of War. God of War almost won, then vanished completely. I want to say Majora's Mask almost won, and then the next month it vanished completely, and then the next month it came back, but it did way worse for some reason. Trying to think of why. I'm getting grody. I need to try to look into like throat clearing stuff or something, or I don't even know. I keep having to clear my throat all the time, and I don't know what to do about that from talking all the time. I don't have like, I don't lose my voice or like feel pain or anything, but like I just get like buildups and whatnot. And I feel like the level of the problem is variable from day to day, and I don't know what's causing it. It might be things in my diet, like I might be eating certain things on certain days that have a different effect on that, and but I'm not tracking it correctly to notice what the difference is or something, maybe. But there's like some days where I just have to fight it all day, and other days where nothing, and it surprises me at times. That killed my train of thought pretty hard. Oh yeah, like I was thinking about how like the voters will just have massively different reactions to games sometimes. Like it's not like there's a heyday or like a hype moment for Majora's Mask, for example. It's an older game, so it's not like its time came and went like Overwatch and God of War. But like 1 month, it's like down to the wire. I think it was when Fez won. It was like practically, it was like almost a tie that broke free from being a tie near the end or something. And then I want to say the next month it disappeared. And then the next month, when it came back again, suddenly a game that had almost won was losing to things that it was stomping. Like specifically Mario Odyssey, which I'm playing now, has been nominated many times in the past. And suddenly won this time. But, like, it got stomped by Majora's Mask the time that Majora's Mask almost won, and then this time this time it stomped out Majora's Mask and took the win, and I have no idea what leads to these, like, these mood shifts among the audience. Like, for all I know, somebody made some popular video on YouTube somewhere that, like, made everyone think about this particular thing at this particular time, or there might be zero stimuli of any kind and people are just randomly shifting. Like on one level you might think, oh, it's been more time since the last Zelda game, maybe people will, like, as time passes, be more and more interested in the next Zelda game happening or something. Or maybe the opposite, I don't know. Like, instead of, like, something, I don't know. I don't have an idea there. I don't have anything else to say. That's just, it's a thing that's interesting to look at and break down. And you just start to wonder who came and who went and so on. I guess on Patreon's topic I should give an update. The VR goal is now far away. I didn't change the VR goal. It's just that my support on Patreon changed by a fair bit. It was a really interesting dashboard update to see because I was making less money with more Patreon subscribers is basically what happened. It was a background fear that I had at some point, and then but it stuck around long enough that I kind of forgot about it, and then it came back and I was like, oh right, this thing. What happened is I just had a handful of Patreon subscribers that supported at larger numbers, and then at the same time multiple of them all reduced their Patreon pledge down to like the minimum pledge. I think for nominating, I think all of them went down to 15 from like much larger numbers. And on some level that was a thing that I kind of almost saw as inevitable. I think what surprised me is that some of those people stuck around in that tier, in that level of support for way longer than I thought they did, to the point where I forgot, oh right, I have like a perilous number of my almost 2,000 I had at the time. A somewhat perilous amount of it was consisting of smaller numbers of people pledging large amounts, which makes me nervous. Just because I don't. One thing is that when somebody first pledges a large number, you don't know if it's real, so you're waiting for the month to roll over to see if they even, if like their card gets declined, or if it's just a lie. Because like sometimes a kid gets a hold of a credit card and just like does bullshit, and some people try to con this system, and so I'm inherently a little skeptical when I see a huge number. But then when the month rolls over and I do get the pledge, I'm like, oh, this is real. Then I'm nervous for a different reason, which is that that's a lot of money that is at the discretion of one person. There's just a certain security in having a large amount of your Patreon subscribers all be like, having a huge number of small pledges has more security than having a small number of large pledges. Because a bunch of tiny pledges, each individual person's choice to leave or stay or so on is way less impactful, which is good because that means you're more stable. Whereas smaller numbers of people being able to remove hundreds of dollars of support is potentially more catastrophic when you're like basing your rent on that and stuff like that. Which is not to disparage the people who do support at those levels, it's just that it is inherently less stable compared to the alternative. So yeah, the update was that, as usual, I have more pledges each month than I did before, because that's generally what happens, is I gain more people more than I lose them, but I was like hundreds of dollars in the negatives that month compared to the previous one, which was a little alarming to see until I realized the reason why it was happening was that a couple people shifted. Didn't even leave, but just like shifted their amount. My guess, and in general, was just it's taxes time on some level, which is that I think that this has happened before, not in this exact way, but it has happened before to some extent. It's just that when it's time for people to do their annual finances and so on, that's when they're most likely to change like which things they're subscribed to. Like, oh, maybe we should look, maybe we should second guess our Netflix and Nature Box subscriptions, or who you're supporting on Patreon, or whether or not you need an HBO subscription and so on. Like, you look at your finances that way and so on. So I kind of always expect some amount of dip whenever it's time for people to look at their finances, because that's when they start realizing what they're spending money on and they choose things to cut back on and so on. But it does mean that the VR goal is way further off. We kept oscillating so close to the point where, like, we went from being like $70 away, $30 away, and now we're like, I want to say $300 away or something. So that's we'll see what happens there. I don't think I have anywhere to go with that after that, really. Yeah. Well, let's look up a new question. That was most of an episode, which is good because I don't really have a lot more material to work with. Matt, the Beast of Grammar, asks, how do you feel about your community as a whole? So this is an incredibly open-ended question, and I'm kind of thankful that I waited until the last moment to answer it, so I have to constrain myself in order to avoid making the episode super long, because I could go infinitely about this stuff. Although, to some extent, maybe a redundant question anyway, because I've already... A lot of this Q&A series has been about this topic in various ways. So you have to break it down in a few different ways. One is the question of the people in the community versus, like, one is what do you think of the people in your community versus, like, one is how do you think the community affects your life? And another is how do you think the community compares against other communities? And then there's the issue of what do you think about the concept of having, like, an audience in general? And they're kind of wildly different questions. And I think the first thing to focus on is just that this community changed my life. Just straight up. And like I remember I had the moment where it was time for me to sort of like get this going or end it with, like, when it came to setting up my Patreon in specific. And this is a weird little quest. I was setting up my Patreon and I lost sleep over it. I was like afraid to I think I had to take sleeping medication. I think I've told the story before where it was time for me to try to monetize this in a more aggressive way or stop doing it because I was juggling this with my job and it was becoming too much to deal with. And so I launched my Patreon, put up the announcement about it, and then I went to sleep because I needed to be away from it for a bit. And I was nervous about it, and I think I was afraid to read the comments and so on. I was sure that people would be mad at me for even suggesting the idea of trying to get money, because that is admittedly how some percentage of the internet reacts to all attempts at monetization and so on, is very aggressively and negatively, even, you know, even though they supposedly want this content on a regular basis and the person to stick around and keep doing it and everything, and a basic part of society is that you have to make money at whatever you're doing or you can't really focus on it full time. That's just unless you're just like a trust fund kid with tons of money, you gotta make money continuously. And having a full-time hobby and a full-time job isn't really healthy for any other part of your life. So I think I took sleep medication because I laid there for 2 hours, not able to sleep, but also refusing to check my inbox because I was sure that it would blah blah blah. So I wake up in the morning though, and I have like Patreon support and encouraging messages and so on, and that was really neat. That was when some of the first mistakes happened with Patreon, where I started trying to make certain Patreon tiers just to reward people, because people were pledging numbers that I didn't expect, and I was caught off guard. So I was trying to make up rewards for these larger amounts that people were pledging in order to like justify what they were doing and stuff. It just seemed like the right thing to do, but they didn't scale well, and the whole Patreon sponsored hour thing was like a weird, awkward system that would just mostly disappoint the normal audience, because they were like, why did the series get canceled? I'm like, well, it didn't really get canceled, it's just it does X number of episodes based on how many that person asks for, and yeah, that stuff. How do I damsel?
What can I do for you?
Damsel of the Cliffs.
Go with honor, friend.
I don't understand this question, this quest. I don't know, fuck it.
Well met. Light bless you.
I'm over it. Like that was really a big surprise having that happen. And also, like I've said before, that like having a community is what fuels you when you make YouTube content. Usually more so in many cases than the idea of monetization, or like having like this be your livelihood, is often just the idea of like generally people make stuff for it to be watched. And this is, on some level, I almost feel like it's almost better off that I have this really specific format on YouTube, where it's just it's more explicit in its nature. I make content where I am on my soapbox, and other people don't interact with it. They just can watch it and comment on it. And that's kind of where I get my fill, maybe. And I think that's part of what has let me avoid a lot of social media, I feel like. Because there's a really weird life I can't fully relate to, which is the idea of like all of life being constant social media, like the Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and Snapchat people constantly interfacing with that as part of their regular life constantly, and like oversharing and kind of like feeling submitting to this conditioning to constantly seek the approval of the people around you and the numbers, X number of likes and shares on your tweets or on your Facebook post, or of your vacation and so on. And I've fallen into that stuff sometimes, but I've largely fallen off, and I've specifically I've actually taken down my entire Facebook account. I just took it out. I'm like, I'm out. I'm done with this. That was for other reasons too. Just being exposed to the political opinions constantly of the people around you is just bad for mental health, I think, at some point. You can make a whole case about like, what, are you hiding from people? You're hiding away from opinions that disagree with you and stuff like that. But so just being on a constant barrage of oftentimes, like, frankly offensive things and horrible opinions being spewed out with no filter onto social media can really make it hard to look at the people around you the same way sometimes. And it's kind of counterproductive if none of the people involved are interested in having a conversation or actually having their minds changed or ever discussing these things. So it's just there to make you like them less, but never to have a discussion. I think it's been a good idea for me to back away from a lot of that stuff. I don't know, maybe it's time to take a break. I don't mean from YouTube. I mean like now. I'm feeling spacey for some reason, and I'm not sure what this is. I have a feeling right now. I hope I'm not getting sick or something. That would suck. Maybe I just haven't had enough water today. I say that as I drink a bunch of water. I don't know. Yeah, I feel, my head feels spacey all of a sudden. So I'm like having trouble formulating my thoughts a little bit. But yeah, like I did this for years and we didn't get... Oh my god, I can't. What is happening to me? I'm like not formulating sentences. This is gonna be a problem for my day of recording. I gotta start soon. Maybe I'll just go for a walk or something. But there's this, bucket. See you guys next time. I'm out. Maybe I'll continue this question next episode or something. I am just not here right now, apparently. Oh well. I did like an hour, it's fine. I'll see you guys next time. Send in your questions. I'm out of questions. The ones I was going off of today were like emergency Discord questions, which I largely farmed for by talking all around them. So you can send them. You send me a question largely by directly messaging me on Patreon. So go ahead and do that, and I'll see you guys next time. I don't know. Do I need a nap?